They say a plane can vanish in Alaska like breath in the cold. No wreckage, no trail, no reason, just silence, heavy and unmoving, like the snow that never melts at the peaks. This isn't a ghost story. This is about real names, logged flight paths, and the spaces where maps come undone. We begin not with what was found, but with what was never recovered. The triangle is not on any official chart. No red border warns pilots. No dashed lines trace it on government maps. But if you ask the old bush pilots, the ones who flew fuel drums to remote stations and mail to cabins tucked between rivers, they'll sketch it from memory. Anchorage to Juneau to Reykjavik. 3 points, 3 edges, millions of acres of wilderness inside. It begins, in a way, with the cold. Not the kind that bites, but the kind that waits, patient and permanent. The kind of cold that can dull steel and silence engines without warning. In November of 1950, a Douglas C-54 Skymaster lifted off from Elmendorf Air Force Base. On board were 44 people, military personnel, family members, and civilians. Their flight plan was clean. Weather forecasts were stable. Visibility was reported as excellent. The aircraft was never seen again. Somewhere over the interior, around Gulkana, the radio transmission stopped. Radar contact blinked, then vanished. What followed was one of the largest search efforts in American history at the time. 85 planes, dozens of search teams, weeks of aerial sweeps and ground patrols. They searched over 20,000 square miles, an area larger than West Virginia. Not a shred was found. No metal, no oil slick, no fabric. It was as if the plane had been plucked out of the sky. The official report cited probable crash, poor terrain, and weather variability. But unofficially, the rescuers told a different story. Lieutenant Gary Rusk, one of the early airmen on the scene, later wrote in a private journal, "We flew the same path 12 times. Once we saw what looked like a shape in the snow, dark, maybe a wing. We circled back. It was gone, or it was never there." He noted something else. The radios crackled with static right before the signal dropped. Always static. No voice. Just a flat, buzzing wall. This detail, the radio static, is mentioned in several disappearances within the triangle. Final transmissions often in mid-sentence or in digital garble. Recordings that sound almost too clean until they fracture into static and then nothing. It's not conclusive, but it's consistent. Locals, especially among the Athabascan and Inupiat elders, have long warned of areas where the land folds inward. A hunter from Tanana once said, "There are places where you walk, and you're not followed, not even by your own shadow." In some versions of the lore, the land itself remembers. In others, it forgets you entirely. This triangle, this idea, has become more than just a pattern of vanishings. It has become a shape of silence. The missing plane in 1950 was only one of many. The difference was its scale, its undeniable documentation. The fact that 44 names were recorded and none came back. It shook the public, but it only confirmed what the wilderness had already been trying to say. Some places do not operate on our time, or on our logic. A retired FAA investigator, Eldon Price, spoke decades later about the triangle in a taped interview. People want answers, but I think it's the wrong question. There are things out there we don't have language for. We try to call it weather, or pilot error. But what if it's just outside the model? By the 1960s, pilots began altering their routes slightly, just a few degrees off the established paths when flying through interior Alaska. They didn't talk about it. But the triangle had become folklore among professionals. You don't fly it unless you have to. And even then, you go fast. No sightseeing. No unnecessary chatter. The terrain doesn't help. The triangle spans glaciers, mountains, and dense boreal forest. You can walk a straight line for 6 hours and end up where you started. Compasses falter, sometimes spinning without pattern. GPS devices blink red or go blank. But technology fails in many remote places. What makes the Alaskan Triangle different is how often people do too. In the Fairbanks State Archives, a document from 1953 notes something odd in relation to the Skymaster case. A correction made to a flight manifest. A passenger count updated from 44 to 43, then crossed out and changed back. Clerical error, most likely. But in the margins, in pencil, someone wrote, "It feels like 43." These small inconsistencies, harmless on paper, Repeat like a soft echo throughout cases in the triangle. Incorrect logbooks. Timestamps out of order. Photos that don't match the terrain they claim to show. Static on the tapes. Patterns emerge. Not loud, not obvious, but like something breathing just behind the walls. And always that shape. 3 points. 3 lines. Enclosing nothing. June 1972. Summer in Alaska is a brief gift. Light lingers longer than it should, and the air smells of melting ice and birch. Harold Messner and his wife Diane arrived in Anchorage with plans to make their way west toward Nome. He had recently retired from the Air Force as a navigator. She had never flown in a small plane before. They were supposed to take the usual route, a longer, safer arc hugging the coastlines and supply towns. But Clyde Berkson, their pilot, offered an alternative. "I can shave 90 minutes if we cut over the brooks," he said, smiling through a coffee-stained grin. "Sky's clear. Wind's right. Done it 100 times." Messner agreed, not just for speed, but familiarity. He knew the numbers. The headings. To him, it was math. They lifted off from Merrill Field just after noon. The weather reports were perfect, temperatures in the 60s, wind under 10 knots. Their intended flight path cut through a narrow corridor near Mount Deborah, an isolated peak known for jagged spires and sudden gusts. Then over Circle, following a straight line toward the Nome landing strip. They never arrived. The Civil Air Patrol launched a search within hours of their missed landing. In a radio transcript from Berkson's last contact, there is no alarm, no engine trouble, no distress, just routine confirmation, passing over mile 108. Smooth air, all good, and then silence. When the report reached Harold's younger brother, James Messner, he didn't hesitate. He was a hydrologist by trade, but had grown up with maps and compasses. The triangle, to him, wasn't folklore. It was a puzzle. A shape made of mistakes. James spent 2 months combing through riverbeds and narrow glacial corridors. He chartered his own flights, walked creek beds, camped at airstrips and ranger stations. He kept meticulous notes. Entries marked with dates and grid coordinates, weather reports, topographical sketches. And then the journal changes tone. The neat handwriting begins to tilt. Some pages are half-finished. One page, dated July 19th, 1972, reads, "Saw lights above haze. Not stars. Not planes. They held position, then dropped." Another entry, for days later. "Compass spun again today. North for 20 minutes, then east. I stood still the whole time. And finally, I think this place bends inward. Not physically. Not like a fold. Like, time has a weak spine here." James was warned early on by the elders in talk. An old woman, Antioch, half-blind but sharp, told him simply, "Some places remember you. Some places don't let go." He thought it poetic, a kind of grief expression. Only later, during his second search loop, did it feel literal. He realized he was retracing his own steps. Same animal tracks, same snapped branch. But the GPS showed he was 5 miles off. He never found Harold, nor Diane, nor the plane. In fact, no one ever did. But James' field notes, forgotten in a box in the University of Fairbanks Geology Building, were rediscovered decades later. One page showed a hand-drawn triangle, dotted lines, 3 labels, where we left, where we should have been, where the air didn't feel right. That last point was near Mount Hayes, a place that would soon appear again and again in accounts of disappearances. A silent sentinel in the eastern Alaska range, known for its geometric ridges and unnatural quiet. Decades later, a pilot named Aaron Lennox would fly over that same corridor. He would later say, "It was like flying into a room that didn't want you in it. Like the air had already decided you were a mistake." And yet, flights continue through that corridor. People still choose the shortcut. Sometimes it's cost. Sometimes weather. Sometimes, people feel drawn, though they don't always realize it. There's something subtle in that part of the sky. A pull that doesn't shout. It suggests. It's easy to say people disappear in the Alaskan wilderness because it's harsh, remote, and unforgiving. But Messner's flight was inside a window of clarity. No storms, no wildlife, no enemies. And yet, the mountain opened, and it swallowed. To this day, bush pilots flying near that route report short static bursts on Channel 3, usually around 3:03 p.m. One transmission picked up in 1997 simply repeated the same line 3 times, garbled and faint. Shortcut, shortcut, shortcut. The plane's number, N3703K, has never reappeared. But hikers near Hayes sometimes report hearing distant engine noise, always above the clouds, always fading before it arrives. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe, like James Road, it's a place that bends inward, where people go missing not all at once, but slowly, as if forgotten by the world before the world realizes it's lost them. The Alaskan wilderness doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in patterns. And sometimes, those patterns speak back, through dates, directions, and disappearances. By the late 1980s, a small team of folklore researchers and archivists from the University of Alaska began noticing something odd, not just in the vanishings, but in how they occurred. The triangle had already swallowed planes, hikers, hunters, even search parties. But what emerged wasn't a long list of random events. It was a rhythm. Disappearances occurred in clusters of 3. 3 hikers one season, 3 snowmobilers the next, 3 rescue workers the year after. Always spaced within weeks or months. Always within the triangle. Always under similar conditions. Clear skies, malfunctioning radios, unusual silence just before the loss of contact. They called it the rule of 3s. Some dismissed it as numerology or coincidence. But not Leanne Hostetler. She was a NOAA technician with a quiet mind and an uncomfortable intuition. In 1991, she set up a microclimate monitoring station near Mount Hayes to study sudden temperature drops and strange pressure systems, phenomena that had no clear origin. She logged every detail: temperature shifts of 15 degrees in under a minute, barometric anomalies without any correlating wind or storm activity, even magnetic disturbances, compasses drifting 2 to 4 degrees without explanation. Then, she started hearing things. At first, she noted ambient humming at night. Not mechanical, not musical, just a steady sound, like air being stretched. She moved her equipment, thinking it was battery feedback. But the sound followed. One of her final journal entries, scribbled in the margins of a barometric chart, simply reads, "They hum. They hum before they disappear." Hostetler vanished on March 3, 1992, a 3rd victim that season. Her tent was gone. Her weather station left behind, still recording, still printing paper logs that flapped in the breeze. The last reading was taken at 3:03 a.m. It showed a complete systems freeze for 44 seconds. All instruments blanked simultaneously, then resumed, as if something passed through. It was the 3rd disappearance in 3 weeks within the same 18-mile radius. A hiker, a snowmobile guide, and Leanne, none of them connected, all of them gone. It wasn't long before the locals began adjusting. Hunters stopped traveling alone. Pilots logged redundancies in flight plans. Rescue teams brought analog backups, compasses, flares, paper maps. Digital gear was no longer trusted entirely. Among Athabaskan and Inupiat families, the rule of 3s was already known, though not by name. One hunter from Fort Yukon, when asked about the disappearances, said simply, "The land counts differently than we do. You bring 3, maybe 1 returns. That's the risk. That's always been the risk." Patterns also emerged in the numbers. Triplicate timestamps. GPS logs with repeating sequences, 33.3033 latitude, minus 149.0033 longitude. Pilots started reporting radio static most frequently around 3:03 p.m., often over areas with no known interference sources. In a 1997 incident, a wildlife photographer named Tomas Ricci went missing while tracking caribou near the edge of Denali State Park, right along the eastern shoulder of the triangle. His radio log, recovered later by a passing ranger, included one last audio burst, just 7 seconds long. It repeated the phrase, "Three's not safe, three's not safe," before dissolving into static. His campsite was intact, camera untouched, backpack zipped, but Ricci himself, gone. The ranger who found the radio refused to return to that area. In a later interview, he said, "It felt like something had just been there. Like I walked into a room where someone had stopped speaking a second before I arrived." To date, more than 16 documented clusters of 3 disappearances have been recorded within the triangle. That's not counting solo vanishings. Only those that come as a trio. 3 names, 3 routes, same triangle. Theories multiplied. Some blamed microbursts, sudden, violent wind shears that can knock planes from the sky. Others pointed to geomagnetic flux, citing the triangle's proximity to the North Magnetic Pole. There were even mentions of energy vortices, unseen forces that tangle matter and memory. But most locals don't bother with explanations. They just respect the pattern. A guide out of Talkeetna put it best. It's not about whether you believe it. It's about whether the land believes in you. So when a search team forms in 3, or a bush plane departs with 3 passengers, or 3 strangers meet on a remote trail, the silence grows heavier. The radios get quieter, and the number 3 begins to feel less like a count and more like a warning. Mount Hayes isn't the tallest mountain in Alaska. Log any interference. Map it. Repeat. On day 2, things began to fail. Relay A stopped receiving. He checked the hardware. It was fine. Then Relay C began repeating data packets. Not new transmissions, but the same old test signals sent hours before. Looped exactly 3 times. Each loop degraded into static, then silence. On day 3, Don heard something over the receiver. Not code. Not static. Breathing. 1 long inhale. Pause. Then 3 short exhales. No wind that day. No wildlife recorded nearby. He returned to base early. Told no one. It was only years later, in a recorded interview, that he finally spoke of it. That mountain doesn't echo. You call into it, and nothing comes back. It's like shouting into a photograph. Others have felt it too. Search and rescue crews report gear malfunctions only in the lower valleys. Time discrepancies, watches ticking differently, voices slightly delayed on comms. In 2003, a mountaineer documented aurora-like lights rising from the base even when the sky was clear and solar activity was absent. No storms, no power stations, just light. And still, no echo. Indigenous oral histories treat Hayes with reverence and unease. To the Upper Tanana people, it's known not as a peak, but as a silent gate. A passage, not to death, but to something outside the circle of this world. Elder Mekeline Uda, interviewed in the 1970s, described it like this: the mountain watches, but it does not blink. It remembers, but not in years, in names. She claimed the mountain takes those who do not carry their names properly, those without tether. No family, no village, no voice to call them back. In her words, if no one waits for you, Hayes keeps you. Skeptics, of course, offer rational explanations. Geological anomalies, magnetic minerals, atmospheric lensing, all plausible, all unproven. But when multiple flight instruments fail in clear skies, when audio recordings pick up patterns that resemble breath, and when you stand at the glacier base and shout, and nothing answers, not even the birds, explanation starts to feel like a fragile language. In 2016, a documentary team set up motion-triggered cameras along the eastern slope. They captured 11 hours of footage. 10 hours showed nothing but drifting fog. But during a single 14-minute window, the cameras recorded a distortion, like heat shimmer, but without heat. It moved in a perfect equilateral triangle, descending across the snow. There were no footprints, no avalanche, just the ripple. One camera shorted out. The others simply turned off. The batteries were new. When the footage was shown to a geospatial analyst, she noted something unexpected. The distortion moved against the wind, not in curves, but in deliberate angles, like a folding map. The lead director ended the expedition early. His only comment to press was, "We were filming a mountain." And then I realized, it was watching us back. Those who've stood near Hayes speak of an unnatural calm. Too quiet. No echo. No bird call. Even footsteps feel flattened, as if the ground absorbs sound before it travels. One climber, Alex Renford, recounted hearing the crunch of his own boots, a half-second late, as if the sound hesitated before reaching him. He turned around halfway to summit, said later, "I felt like I had entered a room where I wasn't invited, and the silence in that room was older than anything I could understand." Some mountains challenge you. Hayes ignores you, until it doesn't. It doesn't shout. It waits. And sometimes it keeps. Echoes are natural. They tell you a space is alive, responsive, balanced. In the mountains, a single call should come back twice. once from the near ridge, again from the far one. Even in silence, nature has ways of answering itself. But in parts of the Alaskan Triangle, especially near haze, sound behaves differently. It moves slower. It vanishes. Sometimes, it returns changed. In 2008, Travis Weller, a geologist working with a private mineral survey team, documented something peculiar. He was stationed with 2 colleagues, mapping rock formations near a collapsed ice cave. They had set up small seismic charges to measure subsurface depth. Every charge was paired with a microphone to capture the echo response. The data came back incomplete. Some detonations returned only half the echo, or none at all. Other charges produced a return echo before the blast occurred, milliseconds early, out of order, as if the sound was remembering something that hadn't happened yet. Weller didn't believe it. He reran the data, checked his instruments, but the results were the same. He logged his conclusion in the expedition journal. It's not that there's no echo. It's that the land refuses to answer, or answers when it wants to. The pattern was dismissed by his supervisors. One called it instrument drift. Another called it psychological bleed over. But Weller insisted something was wrong with the acoustic memory of the place. He described it like trying to yell underwater. There's resistance, he said, as if the air is too thick for the sound to go anywhere. He left the team early, never returned to Alaska. That same year, a solo hiker named Ellie Bradshaw was traversing part of the Denali Highway, cutting along the southern interior. A seasoned backpacker, she kept a full log, voice recordings, and GPS tracks. Her final voice memo, timestamped at 3:03 p.m., same as many triangle anomalies, was recorded atop a bluff facing the Haze Range. It is calm, quiet. She sounds tired but composed. Then comes this. It's been 20 minutes and I haven't heard anything. No wind. No birds. Not even my footsteps. I clapped. No echo. I yelled. Nothing came back. I don't know how to describe it. It's like the world forgot how to bounce sound. That recording cuts off midway through her next sentence. The device was found days later, inside her tent. Unzipped. Undisturbed. She was never seen again. In the years that followed, similar reports surfaced. Hunters tracking elk who realized their gunshots made no echo. Pilots flying low over valleys who noticed engine sounds dropping off midair, like they had flown into a vacuum. Hikers yelling out in joy or warning, only to hear no reply. One local ranger, Mark Reese, said, "It's not just quiet. It's like your voice leaves your mouth and never touches anything. Like it's still falling. Still falling." The idea of the echo void became popular among amateur theorists online. They pointed to infrasound phenomena, low-frequency waves that can cause anxiety, disorientation, or dread in humans. Others cited acoustic shadows, places where wind and terrain combine to muffle sound completely. But none of these explain why the phenomena are localized, repeatable, and seem to follow the rule of threes. In 2013, a recording team from an independent documentary series called Borderland Frequencies set out to test the phenomenon. They brought with them directional mics, parabolic dishes, sound cannons, and a custom low-frequency generator. Their goal was to capture the echo that wasn't there. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Birds chirped. Wind rustled the spruce trees. Every sound returned as expected. But on the 3rd day, just before sunset, their directional mics picked up something unexpected. Not an echo, but a mirror. The crew clapped. And instead of one reply, they heard 3 quick repetitions. Not echoes, repeats. Each one slightly off. The 3rd came from behind them, opposite the direction of the original sound. They stopped recording after that. Some of the team members became ill. One suffered disorientation and nausea. Another refused to speak for days. The footage was never released publicly, but a leaked segment circulated among fringe researchers. Audio where the host claps once and 3 identical claps return. Each fainter, each closer. The theories grew darker. Some believed the land record sound. That haze, or the triangle, is a kind of natural phonograph, replaying moments at will, or perhaps to warn. Others believe it's not an echo at all, but something trying to speak back using the only sound it's been given. One archivist noted that in several recorded cases, the 3rd echo is always slightly distorted. Not just fainter, changed, slower, like a voice learning a word for the first time. The silence of the triangle isn't just absence. Its presence with restraint. Something listening, always, but choosing when to respond. And when it does, it doesn't always give back what you asked for. Sometimes, it gives you something older, or something that's been waiting too long. There's a saying among old Alaskan bush pilots: if you go down out here, the sky remembers you longer than the ground does. They mean it literally. In the wilderness of the Alaskan Triangle, wreckage doesn't stay visible. Snow buries it, rivers move it, trees swallow it, and if it's never found, the ground forgets. But the sky holds on. Over the decades, strange sightings have been logged in the upper reaches of the triangle. Not lights in the classic sense, not fireballs or craft, but movements. Geometric, repeating, appearing where no weather systems should exist. In the winter of 1995, a civilian pilot named Kenny Dahl was ferrying supplies to a remote mine east of Fairbanks. The sky was clear, moonless. He flew over the edge of Mount Deborah, following a well-used route. At 14,000 feet, his altimeter began to drift, dropping 300 feet, then returning, though the plane remained level. Then the static came. It started in his headset, soft but climbing in pitch. Dahl described it later, like someone tuning a radio to a station that wasn't there. Then the light appeared, not ahead, not above, but beside the plane. He described it not as a beam, but as a sheet, a translucent pane of pale white, almost fog but glowing faintly, moving in tandem with his aircraft. When he banked right, it stayed level. When he dropped altitude, it followed. Dahl called in the sighting, but the audio logs later recovered had no mention of light. Only his voice, mid-transmission, pausing and repeating the same word. Echo, echo, echo. He landed safely, but never flew that route again. In the early 2000s, satellite imagery began to show thermal anomalies near the southern edge of the triangle, particularly over areas without geothermal activity. Triangular-shaped heat blooms would appear and vanish within a single satellite pass. No wildfires, no flares, just silent, shape-specific warmth in snow-covered regions. NASA dismissed them as sensor errors, but private research firms began quietly collecting the images. One image showed 3 perfect heat points forming an equilateral triangle, roughly 44 miles across. Another image captured a straight corridor of heat, just 3 miles wide, cutting through frozen tundra, as if something massive had passed through, without touching the ground. People on the ground reported strange aurora behaviors. Not the swirling greens and reds of high-latitude lights, but stationary beams, hovering in total silence, sometimes blinking in triplet patterns. 3 pulses. 3-second pause. 3 pulses again. A hunter named Joseph Tactic, camping near Talk, once saw these lights rising vertically like pillars. No movement, no noise. He watched them for hours. When interviewed later, he said, they weren't in the sky. The sky had opened, and they were behind it. The FAA began receiving increasing reports from small aircraft flying into the triangle. Common elements included static burst on radio at 3:03 p.m., altimeter drift, loss of GPS lock for exactly 44 seconds, sudden white haze outside cockpit window, and always the feeling of not being alone. Most planes landed. Some did not. The disappearances are not always dramatic. Some pilots are logged as having taken off and never landing. No distress call, no radar loss, just a missing arrival. Their transponders remain traceable for minutes after visual loss, often bouncing between impossible points, covering miles and seconds. An FAA analyst once said off record, "It's like watching a moth trapped in a jar that isn't there." An archived case from 1978, long classified, involved an Air National Guard test flight. The jet's flight recorder survived a crash in the Yukon Flats. The last 90 seconds of cockpit audio includes a moment where both pilots stop speaking mid-conversation. No alarm, just breath. Then one says, "Do you see that?" No reply, just a soft, low hum, mechanical but uneven. The final words on the tape are, "It's copying us." The jet was found shattered. No signs of fire, no impact crater, just pieces laid out as if placed, not crashed. And one wing, completely clean of snow despite lying in drifts for 3 days. Some now believe the sky in this part of Alaska is not empty, not watching, but recording. replaying versions of flights, copying routes, returning echoes not of sound, but of movement, of intention. One physicist from UAF suggested a theory that certain areas may act as memory pockets in spacetime, where motion loops, where location is not fixed, where something once done, like a flight path, may be replayed without the original pilot. Her paper was never published. Her name is not widely known, but in a private correspondence uncovered in 2017, she wrote, "We've misunderstood memory as something that belongs to the brain. What if space remembers more than we do? The triangle, they say, is not just a location. It is a repeating attempt by something or the land itself to hold on to what it has lost or to return what was taken, but imperfectly. Planes that echo, paths that replay, pilots who fly routes someone else already flew and never know it. And sometimes, what comes back isn't exactly what went in. Not everyone who enters the triangle disappears. Some come back, but they rarely return the same. These are the outliers, the stories that confuse the pattern, but don't break it. Because though they survive, something in them no longer fits." In 1999, Rebecca Lang, a wildlife photographer from Oregon, went missing for 3 days while trekking solo near the Toklat River Basin. She carried a GPS tracker, satellite phone, and an emergency transponder. On the morning of August 17th, her signal vanished. A search party was dispatched. They found no wreckage, no trail, just her gear, undisturbed, arranged neatly under a tarp. No Rebecca. On the 4th day, just after sunrise, she walked back into base camp. No limp, no visible injury. Her boots were dry. Her pack was gone. When they asked where she'd been, she paused. "I walked in a straight line, but the trees kept coming back." She was dehydrated but coherent. No signs of trauma, but her camera memory card, normally filled with images, was empty. Only one photo remained, a blurry shot of a tree line, but the trees formed a shape, a near-perfect triangle of negative space, where the sky bled through. Rebecca no longer speaks publicly about her experience. In a podcast recorded 5 years later, she offered only this: "There's a version of me still out there. I think I left her behind." There's also the story of Walter "Red" Hammond, a bush pilot who went missing in 1983. He was found 6 days later, but not where anyone expected. Red had taken off from McGrath heading for Bettles. His last radio contact was routine. 3 days later, he walked into a ranger outpost 180 miles east of his intended route, on foot, frostbitten, delirious, but alive. What baffled the rangers wasn't just the distance he'd covered. It was the fact that he claimed he had never crashed. "I landed. Field was clear. But the sky, it wasn't right. It didn't move. I kept trying to take off, but the world wouldn't turn." His plane was eventually found. Not wrecked, but parked. Wheels down, engine intact. No sign of struggle. Snow around it untouched, as if it had been placed there gently and left waiting. Red never flew again. He spent the rest of his life in Sitka, silent, often sketching odd geometric shapes, overlapping triangles, loops of numbers, and spirals that ended abruptly. In his final months, he told a neighbor, "I came back down, but I don't think I ever left the air." These aren't isolated stories. They echo across time, each with subtle changes, but always the same hollow thread. People return without time, watches dead, or showing impossible durations. They speak of fog with no source, of paths that folded, of sound that moved behind them but not around them. They often carry a lingering static in their hearing, like a hum just beneath silence. In 2006, a seasonal ranger named Brenda Sloan disappeared while conducting a wildlife census along the Nebesna River. She was found 2 days later, sitting on a rock at the river's edge, staring at her reflection. When approached, she spoke clearly, but slowly. "I counted the birds. Then the birds started counting me." She refused to walk back. She had to be airlifted out. Doctors found no physical harm, but Sloan never returned to the field. She eventually moved to Arizona, off-grid, unreachable. The only note she left behind was scratched onto a hiking map. "Some echoes don't come back. They come through." The phenomenon gained a quiet name among the search teams, echo survivors. Not because they echoed anything, but because they seemed like echoes themselves. Thinner, off-tune, as if something about them had been copied incompletely. One SAR operator, requesting anonymity, said, "It's like we brought back the body, but not the full person. They move, they eat, they talk, but behind their eyes, it's like they're still listening for something." Some theorists, particularly among fringe physicists and acoustic researchers, suggest these individuals passed through a threshold, a fold in geography or time, a moment when reality wavered long enough for a person to slip sideways and return not wrong, but slightly rewritten. One hypothesis posits that the triangle holds areas of magnetic displacement, where orientation, memory, and even cognition may be subtly distorted. Another theory suggests dimensional bleed, not full teleportation, but emotional or perceptual duplication. In simpler terms, the body comes back, but a shadow stays behind. Or maybe it's the other way around. The families of these returnees often describe them as there but far, like a radio station slightly off tune. Familiar, but distant. Some grow quiet. Others obsess. Many eventually leave Alaska, never to return. And a few vanish a second time, without warning, as if whatever let them go changed its mind. Some places leave no scars, no trails, no tombstones, only shapes. The Alaskan Triangle is one of them. It has no monuments, no markers, but if you lay enough maps over each other, aviation charts, hiking routes, missing persons reports, you'll see it. A triangle. Simple, unmoving, unexplained. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself, but it remains. Not on paper, but in absence. At last count, more than 16,000 people have vanished in Alaska since 1988. Most in the interior, most without a trace. Not all can be blamed on the triangle, but many refuse to be blamed on anything else. In a small museum in Fairbanks, there's a handwritten list tacked to the back wall. Yellowed paper, ink smudged by cold fingers. It's not a memorial. It's a ledger, names, dates, locations, estimated time of last contact. There's a pattern in that list. 3 names. Gap. 3 names. Gap. A rhythm, soft, persistent. You almost miss it, but it's there. And at the bottom, in a different pen, someone has written, "Some echoes never left." Some names are still falling. What the land takes, it doesn't explain. It doesn't boast. It waits. A geologist once described the triangle as not haunted, just hollowed. Like a basin where sound, people, and time roll in and don't always roll out. But others believe the land knows exactly what it's doing. "It's a recorder," said Henry Adijuk, a Gwich'in elder. "Not for us, for something older. It keeps track, not in words, in weight. The mountains carry it." And maybe that's true, because those who've returned, the ones who came back wrong, carry something too. They don't always speak of it, but it's in their silence. In how they pause before doorways. In how they look over their shoulder at nothing. In how they never, ever go back. Even the sky seems different here. Not threatening, not warm. Just watching, as if it knows where you are, and where you were supposed to be. And it's not sure which one of you made it home. In 2019, a drone survey team was flying over a remote corner of the Wrangell Mountains, following a grid. Nothing unusual. No anomalies. Until the drone footage, once reviewed, revealed something small, a thin line in the snow. Straight. Perfect. Too precise for wind, too long for tracks. It connected 3 points, an abandoned campsite, a rusted plane wing, and a lone standing tree. The points formed a triangle, again. Maybe it's just coincidence. A trick of the land. A tangle of science and silence. Or maybe it's something deeper. A memory kept not by people, but by the place itself. A shape that doesn't move, even when everything else disappears. To stand in the Alaskan Triangle is to stand in a kind of forgetting, where paths repeat, where names echo once and then never again, where the wilderness listens more than it speaks, and where silence is not absence, but attention. People still go. They fly, hike, drift into its corners. Some return, some do not. The triangle doesn't warn. It doesn't welcome. It simply waits. And for those who do not return, there is no final scream. No last call. No closing words. Only one thing remains. The shape. Still. Silent. Watching. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off, and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon. Where names echo once and then never again. where the wilderness listens more than it speaks, and where silence is not absence, but attention. People still go. They fly, hike, drift into its corners. Some return, some do not. The triangle doesn't warn. It doesn't welcome. It simply waits. And for those who do not return, there is no final scream. No last call. No closing words. Only one thing remains. The shape. Still. Silent. Watching. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off, and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon. No closing words. Only one thing remains. The shape. Still. Silent. Watching. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off, and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon.